So with that, I'd like to introduce our panelists, and I'd like to welcome to the stage Ted Tsiakopoulos, a nice Irish name. Ted is CMHC's Ontario Regional Economist and is part of a national team of economists responsible for the provincial and Canadian housing outlooks. He leads a team of analysts responsible for forecasting and analyzing economic and housing market conditions across the province of Ontario. Ted's commentary and research has been featured across major media outlets. He currently sits on the board of directors of the Toronto Association of Business Economists and is a former consultant to Junior Achievement of Canada. Prior to joining CMHC, he worked in the wealth management industry on Bay Street. Ted obtained a master's degree in economics from York University and also studied at the London School of Economics in the UK. I also welcome to the stage Jason Mercer. Sorry. Jason Mercer is the Toronto Real Estate Board's Director of Market Analysis and Service Channels. He leads TREB's Market Analysis program that provides products and services to help realtors and their clients fully understand trends in the GTA housing market and its underlying economic drivers. Jason also manages the delivery of information and data products to TREB's membership. Jason has private and public sector experience in the real estate industry, having previously held positions at PricewaterhouseCoopers and the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. He possesses a Bachelor of Arts degree from Simon Fraser University and a Master of Science in Planning degree from the University of Toronto. Welcome, Jason. I have some comments here, some questions I'd like to ask you. Obviously, there's no question that Toronto has moved internationally from just a city in Canada to the world stage. From time to time as president of TREB, there's no question Toronto is on the world stage. Examples of this is the joint venture between Toronto Waterfront and Sidewalk Labs, including Google and very possibly Amazon headquarters, which is definitely on, believe it or not, we're on the short list. We say top 20, I believe we're top 5. Our city is growing exponentially, and there's so much to analyze and try to make sense of. And you both have a great background from different angles. Ted, you had the benefit and also working in wealth management on Bay Street before moving to real estate. How have you used your experience on Bay Street in your current role?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invite again, Tim. It's great to be here. I consider myself fortunate in that I have worked in the wealth management industry on Bay Street, and I can really provide a perspective on what a bubble really, truly looks like. And the reason I say that is I was in that industry during the price run-up, the .com price run-up, which most of you are probably familiar with. And really, if you want a classical example of a bubble, prices deviating from fundamentals, if you like, or from fair market value, internet stocks were a great example. Right? Some of these stocks trading at 50 to 100 times earnings, maybe 200 times earnings. So that was a classical example. And the other thing I remember is that grandma and grandpa were buying stocks, and risk taking was quite prevalent at the time. So this is not the kind of environment that I'm seeing when I look at real estate in Toronto. It doesn't resemble that kind of activity. I think that it's probably much more milder in scope. We do have some imbalances in this market. There's no question about it. But I think that what makes real estate a bit different than financial assets is that you've got more stability in this sector, right? And there's no better example than what we saw yesterday. What did we see yesterday, right? So financial markets fearing this rise in interest rates, and you get this huge sell-off. So that's good for stocks in that, stocks don't stay overvalued for too long, right? With the push of a button, 70% of trading happens through the push of a button, prices adjust. Real estate prices are a bit stickier, right? And so we're not out of the woods. I guess what I'm saying here is that there are some imbalances there, and we need to work through those imbalances. Now, the good news is since August, the prices have come off. and the economy and demographics continue to improve. So that overvaluation gap, we're working through it. We're resolving it slowly. And I think that's a good step in the right direction. The last thing I wanted to say, Ted, very quickly, is that I've been an ambassador of financial literacy, both at CMHC and outside of CMHC. And you know, when I see 60% of Canadians rating their financial literacy as moderate to poor, when I see the Ontario savings rate hitting an all-time low of 0.6%, when I see recent home buyers, 50% of recent home buyers, going above budget on that last home purchase, that's not the kind of behavior you want to see at this stage of the cycle. And so I think we need to go back to fundamentals as well, and we need to plan. We need a game plan when we're going into an open house. We need to know what the exit strategy is. We need to know what our maximum affordable price is that you're willing to pay. Otherwise, you could easily get emotionally hijacked. And so I just want to end it there, that we need to go back to the basics.
But to stick on the same theme, if you don't mind, what in your opinion would be the key drivers that seem to have drive, Ted, the prices in real estate from what you're seeing from your side of the world in 2017, 16, 17, going to 18 now?
So very quickly, watch out for this. CMHC is actually releasing something tomorrow. There's not a lot I can share, but it's a monster report on escalating home prices and what's contributed to this since 2010 across the country. So watch out for that. Our president will be sharing some of the findings. But in a nutshell, Toronto's a global city, has had an effect on prices. So think of Amazon. That's a great example, right? There are other examples of Amazon that have taken place. You attract high-income households into the city, and they have more purchasing power. They buy houses. Think of renovation spending, the alterations of the stock, right? Think of demolitions of bungalows, replacing those bungalows with two-story homes. That's had an effect. Think about investment. Lots of investment money coming into this sector. Speculation, maybe not as pronounced, maybe more neighborhood specific, but still having some effect. Then you add all these demand factors on top of the supply curve, which if you've taken Economics 101, is, economists use these technical terms, right, Jason? Inelastic supply, non-responsive supply. Doesn't take much change in demand to push prices up, right? So that's what's had an effect. I think moving forward into 2018, we think prices will grow at a more moderate rate. We think that mortgage rates, keep your eye on that. Mortgage rates will probably start to bite a bit. Not a lot, but I think you're going to see that bite on first-time buying activity. But all the other factors that have pushed prices up since 2010 will still be there as positive offsets. So more moderate price growth moving forward.
Thank you, Ted. Jason, TREB just released its outlook too, talking about, and first of all, I've got to thank Jason for being here, because today the numbers came out, and he's actually here, and I think there's about 5 or 6 different news people who want to speak to you after, so I want to thank you again. Just released the outlook for 18. When you prepare the forecast, please share with the group what steps you take, what the process you follow. I know that you've also worked at CMHC alongside Ted at one time, and how your approach has changed since being with TREB.
I think if you think about forecasting any segment of the economy, there's obviously the quantitative side where you look at drivers and you can do the math and develop models and that kind of thing. And certainly I know Ted does that at CMHC and we do that at TREB as well. And I think one of the great benefits of working at the Toronto Real Estate Board and indeed coming to events like this is you get that I guess you could say qualitative or on the ground feedback as well. So whether it's talking about people that I see every day, one of our 50,000 members coming through the office just up the street or coming to events like this, you kind of get feedback from what people are seeing in terms of their clients, in terms of what they're expecting for listings and that kind of thing. So you can use that to sort of play off or juxtapose against, just sort of a standard, quantitative or modeling exercise. And then on top of that, over the last 3 years, we've also got a lot more work on the consumer survey front. So both surveying what people were doing in the preceding year, so if they own a home and recently purchased one, sort of what was driving that decision. But I think even more importantly, when we're talking about 2018 now, is asking, potential households, whether they're ownership households or rental households, are they planning on purchasing a home over the next year? And I think, when we're talking about a bit of a slow start early on, I think some of the reasons for that came through loud and clear when we were looking at the survey, is that, there is some trepidation, I guess you could say, around, sort of what is now sort of the confluence of two, government policy decisions. I'd argue that we're starting to see the impact of the Fair Housing Plan starting to wane a little bit, and we've said that now in a couple of press releases. I believe to be true. I mean, if you look at number one, the case and how things unfolded with similar legislation in British Columbia, and you also just look at what the sales trend was like going into the fall, even if you sort of strip out the effects of the OSFI regulation changes, I think we were starting to see that come around. But now, of course, we have the OSFI guideline, which has the same effect, basically. When we talk about modeling, if you're modeling out the impact of the OSFI guideline, it has a similar effect to a simple increase in rates. And so we're up against that regulation change. We're up against higher borrowing costs today, and certainly what we saw this time last year. And I think more of the bite has actually come out of the first-time buyer side of the market. We saw that in our survey, and it makes sense. If you're someone who's either renting or, say, living with your parents or in some sort of accommodation like that, you have a lot of flexibility. You don't necessarily have to buy. And so if something happens, if events take place in the marketplace that, say, give you some pause, you can take that pause. You can step back and say, I'm going to see where I stand in the marketplace relative to these changing conditions and make that decision. So, long story short, I think, where I've been able to sort of expand my horizons when talking about an outlook is taking advantage of both feedback from our membership and also taking advantage of a lot of sort of consumer survey work that we've rolled out over the last 3 years or so.
So let's look at the forecast. Thank you for that. The forecast that just came out recently is between 85,000 and 95,000 sales. How's that jive with the economic report of things being 22% down, but values are going to go up? I know Ted mentioned it, but if you don't mind sharing, your thought process around those numbers for 2018.
Yeah, and that range kind of played into the fact that it is going to be somewhat of a volatile year, or probably reverse to what we saw in 2017, in the sense that we're looking down the barrel of a relatively slow start, and then likely seeing things start to pick up. So if you think about where we are, a little bit more than 4,000 sales. If you look at that, if you adjust for the time of year and then annualize that number, that's coming in around the mid 85, the mid 80,000 mark. And so I think we're looking at that as somewhat of a floor this year. And I think where we stand in that range, when we get through the end of December, is really going to depend on what the timing is of people sort of coming back into the market. Because I think people are going to also come to terms with the stress test as well. I think we're already starting to see that. To a certain degree, when you look at where we're seeing the tighter market conditions. If you look at price growth just for January, and it's a small sample size because January is a pretty slow month, but I mean, you're seeing a heck of a lot tighter market conditions for townhomes and condominium apartments than you are for semis and detached homes, and that's both in the 416 area code and the surrounding regions. And so I think high prices had a bit of a bite from an affordability perspective, and then when you're up against both a stress test and then higher borrowing costs in general, people don't have to necessarily make a binary decision. Yes, I'm going to buy, or no, I'm not. They can take a bit of a step back and say, well, I want to buy a house, or I want to buy a home, but maybe it's not initially what I thought I was going to purchase, and I need to sort of reevaluate where I'm at within the marketplace. And I think we're starting to see that.
So, I mean, how many people in here have had the pleasure of sitting down with a buyer who wanted to buy a 4-bedroom double-car garage house for a certain price, and had to, uneducate them and re-educate them that the 4-bedroom double-car garage in that area is not possible? I think you need to go into a 3-bedroom with maybe one garage, or no garage, or maybe just a garage. Depending on the price that you want to buy. I mean, how many of you have actually gone through that already, where you're reading the news, reading the reports, and you have to, show that leadership and readjusting? To Ted, if you don't mind talking about prices going up, what is the fear or the cause or the effect of, double digits what could that possibly do? What, the bad effects of that, of values going up by double digits?
I've seen this question being addressed by analysts, economists, and we tend to use very technical language, but I'm going to simplify it right at its core. You can't continue to see prices growing double digits when fundamentals, i.e. the drivers of real estate, like employment, like income, like population, interest rates, when those drivers are growing in a linear way, right? Those are drivers that grow in a linear way. So you can't have house prices growing in a non-linear exponential way. And that's what was happening, and you alluded to this thing. That's not sustainable longer term. So I think that, how do we work through some of these imbalances in the market? Well, it requires prices growing in a more linear way. And by the way, I have some good news here. Since prices troughed out in Toronto, bottomed out in August, Jason, was it? Probably about August. Prices are up. I don't have the January data, that's why Jason's here, but this is up to December. Prices are up 1.5% roughly in 6 months or 5 months. You annualize that, that's 3% growth. That's the kind of price growth. That's the kind of behavior we need to continue to see.
But yeah, what we are seeing is the media right now actually talking about year-over-year values being down in double digits in some cases, or being down in, or supply being up in double digits. But what they're actually comparing is last January, last February, last March. So what we're saying here, and what I'm hearing here to the group, is that we need to, again, educate them that we're comparing the wrong time frame. And we need to really look at maybe post what happened in March and share that 1.5% or 2 or 3% or what it may be, and show that it's more of a normal uptick in values. Would that be what I'm...
That's exactly it.
Yeah. So going back to Jason, you said that there's a reasonable probability to see both a decline or advance in overall average price in 18. Can you explain what would need to transpire to see prices up versus down?
Well, I guess it gets back to what you're just saying. I think it's going to be a year where there's certainly mixed messages out there, and there's no doubt that there was a bit of a softness in the market, certainly in comparison to what we saw this time last year. But it gets back to our discussion about supply, and in your sort of introductory slides of this session, you're talking about government policy and sort of recent changes to government policy. Well, one of the things that was included in the Fair Housing Plan that hasn't got as much to play was a commitment on the part of the provincial government to investigate policies that could lead to bringing more supply of new housing stock online quicker, because it gets back to other policies that came online earlier on in the new millennium, where we are constraining what types of products that could come online in certain parts of the region. And I don't think there's any doubt that when you look at the longer term trend for months of inventory, it's really been trending lower since the mid-2000s, say from 2005, 2006, and even more so as we came out of the recession. And that has had an impact. It was a slow impact, because you had a lot of projects and that were already underway, and both on the low-rise side and high-rise side of the market. And so, that stock came online and it was able to be absorbed and it was able to cycle through the market. But as the situation has compounded, especially on the low-rise front over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, that really came to a head. That's one of the reasons why we were talking about in some neighborhoods around the GTA measured inventory in terms of weeks or even days, is that you just weren't seeing that inventory come online, and it compounds over time. So even when we're talking about new listings being up by double digits in January, to your point, that was the second lowest level for new listings in the month of January in the last decade. And so I think the supply issue has been masked because sales are down compared to what we saw, say, in 2016 and the beginning of 2017. But underlying there is still a problem. And so if we start to see that uptick in demand, like I'd expect to see in the second half of this year, we're still up against not a lot of inventory in some neighborhoods, and that's where you're going to start to see that acceleration in price growth. Because it's easy to forget about the supply issue when demand comes off a little bit. And I fear that while there's been plenty of meetings and Ted's participated in some of them, so have I, so have you, I fear that, it's very easy to forget, especially as we move through an election year, that, there's still an underlying supply issue in the GTA that's not going away.
Let's talk about surprises. And I'd like to welcome to the stage Ted Tsiakopoulos, a nice Irish name. Ted is CMHC's Ontario Regional Economist and is part of a national team of economists responsible for the provincial and Canadian housing outlooks. He leads a team of analysts responsible for forecasting and analyzing economic and housing market conditions across the province of Ontario. Ted's commentary and research has been featured across major media outlets. He currently sits on the board of directors of the Toronto Association of Business Economists and is a former consultant to Junior Achievement of Canada. Prior to joining CMHC, he worked in the wealth management industry on Bay Street. Ted obtained a master's degree in economics from York University and also studied at the London School of Economics in the UK. I also welcome to the stage Jason Mercer. Sorry. Jason Mercer is the Toronto Real Estate Board's Director of Market Analysis and Service Channels. He leads TREB's Market Analysis program that provides products and services to help realtors and their clients fully understand trends in the GTA housing market and its underlying economic drivers. Jason also manages the delivery of information and data products to TREB's membership. Jason has private and public sector experience in the real estate industry, having previously held positions at PricewaterhouseCoopers and the Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. He possesses a Bachelor of Arts degree from Simon Fraser University and a Master of Science in Planning degree from the University of Toronto. Welcome, Jason. What kind of a surprise would you see in 2018 or forward that could create something different in the marketplace based on the marketplace outside of housing or in housing that could create a decline or a pullback? Do you see any surprises, Ted, or anything to watch out for?
We're doing some really interesting research. We've built some probability models to give us a sense, and this is one tool that we use. We do talk to industry, but one tool to use to give us a sense of what is that likelihood of a bust period, what is the likelihood that there's a turning point coming, and interest rates don't discount rates. Our models. We have some, I can't share too much because this is research that will be released in the spring, so look out for this, but keep your eye on rates. Interest rates are critical. We could get a surprise there, right? Bond yields have started trending up, and bond markets are very forward-looking. They're not only looking at what central banks are doing, but they're also trying to decipher where's growth going, where's inflation going. It's very forward-looking. You've seen bond yields move up, and that could be a negative surprise. So keep your eye on that. I had a fellow a month ago, he had attended a presentation we were delivering, and he basically came up and he said, look, Ted, I know you guys look at models, I'm not a technical guy, can you just give me one indicator that I should keep my eye on? Forget all of this technical jargon. And I get it, So I said, you know what? Keep your eye on the yield curve. Okay? Keep your eye on the yield curve. The slope, the spread between the long and the short end. And I didn't want to do this, I gave some information away. But anyhow, that has some pretty strong explanatory power. So keep your eye on those spreads. If those spreads narrow, there's probably trouble looming. And if they turn negative, that's red. So that's one thing I think that, and of course NAFTA. I mean these things are big risks, right? If NAFTA gets torn apart, that's 25% of the provincial economy. That's a big deal. And people say, hey, they're going to sign another agreement. Don't worry about it. But yeah, that takes years. And meanwhile, there's a lot of uncertainty for businesses, right?
And with businesses means people buying, right? Because everything's tied in. Just yesterday I was doing an interview and I shared that $2.9 billion in taxes are raised through the housing sector at all levels of government. 68,000 spin-off business 150,000 jobs. So absolutely, I mean, NAFTA and things like that do play a role. Jason?
Yeah, maybe I'll turn to the other side of the coin and sort of think of what one upside risk could be in terms of seeing more perhaps sales, more demand for ownership housing than we would have thought. And it takes me back to previous sort of rounds, and we've had a lot of rounds of changes to mortgage lending guidelines, both leading up to the recession and then coming out, and whether it's talking about dialing back amortization periods or removing the ability to insure mortgages over a certain price ceiling and what have you, and those have never quite had the impact that's been hypothesized. And I think part of that is that we still don't have the best understanding of the household balance sheet and the flexibility that a lot of households have to deal with added cost pressures. I think there's always a tendency to say if we see borrowing costs up by 50 basis points, that's going to be a catastrophe. We're going to see all these people not able to afford their home upon renewal and what have you. Well, I mean, we've been through these cycles. We've seen what happens with the default rate, which isn't that much. Even if you look back at the default rate coming out or going through the last recession. And so I think that you'll see, as a result of the OSFI stress test, as a result of higher rates, that people prove to be more flexible than we may initially have thought in terms of their ability to make a purchase. It may not be the purchase they initially intended upon making, but I think the sales are going to be there higher than where we're standing right now, just perhaps not in the segments of the market that we saw historically.
Thank you. So to stay on that point, the tightest segment, as we talked about earlier, discussed was condos. I would still argue that we have a ways to go before the majority of families would look at this segment as a viable alternative. I wanted to share was at the Economic Summit, the CEO of the Toronto Board of Trade was on the stage, and before she took the post, she lived in Hong Kong for 15 years. And she said it was very, very common to have a family of 4 in a 1+1 bedroom. It is very normal to live that way, right? So to go back to staying on that point, families here still don't look at the segment as a viable alternative. Do you think this will change, Jim?
I think, so I grew up in Vancouver. I moved out here in the fall of 2000, and I know a lot of people back there that are living in family-sized condominium apartments, and it's a segment of the market that works there. I think one of the reasons why we didn't see larger, or haven't seen, larger share of say, 3-bedroom or 1,000+ square foot condominium apartments is the prices of that haven't worked just yet. In a lot of neighborhoods, particularly in the city of Toronto, like you're talking, it's really expensive to build concrete high-rise. And so when you're talking about 1,000+ square feet, there's still a lot of neighborhoods within the city where once you factor in what your mortgage payments are going to be, plus those maintenance fees, and then people do put a price too on, say, not having as much flexibility in terms of what they can do with their unit and dealing with condominium corporations and a board and what have you. So I think in a lot of cases, people have stretched into, say, purchasing a semi or a townhome versus a condominium apartment because to a certain degree, prices haven't got high enough to have people make that shift. I think now, after what we saw in 2016 and 2017 in terms of that type of price growth, when I look at how tight the condo market is versus other segments of the market, I think we are kind of at that inflection point where, from a builder standpoint, there's not going to be as much risk bringing on those larger units that will be sort of hanging around at the end of the pre-construction sales period. I think you are going to see more absorption of those units, whether it's from end users right at the pre-construction stage or whether it's from investors that really do feel that they can sort of act as a wholesaler and turn around and sell that unit to an end user easily upon completion. Because don't forget, I mean, we often talk about investors as a bad word when we're thinking of the condo market, but they're if not for investors, we don't have the condominium apartment units that we have on the ground today. Because when you're talking about a 5-year plus development period for a condominium apartment, it's really hard to convince someone like me or anyone else in this room to say, I'm going to buy a condo now at the sales center, and in 5 years I'm going to move in and live there. Like, a lot can happen in 5 years. It's going to impact that decision. And so if we hadn't seen that investment in the condominium apartment space, where would we be today? We're talking 15-20% price growth right now. We'd probably be north of 30% right now if we hadn't seen that supply come online.
I know 5 years is a long time, it could be twins.
Just to pick up from what Jason mentioned, 80% of the value of real estate right now, believe it or not, is tied up in land. Okay, 80%. 80%. So builders, it's about economies of scale. Where are you going to make the highest margins? Building vertically or building horizontally? Building vertically, right? So it makes sense. So I think from a building standpoint, I think condo construction is here to stay. I think we're probably going to see it continue to grow. So I agree with Jason. It's the future, really.
I agree, thank you. To stay on that, Ted, what dynamics are at play between owning and renting? You have the ability to see trends that you can share when it comes to this segment. And to close it out, did you see the new OSFI rules as necessary?
First question, dynamics between renting and owning. You guys touched on it earlier. Affordability has been eroding, and it's been biting that first-time buyer market. So, if you're a realtor and you're putting all your eggs in this one market, I would strongly suggest that you've already started to look at that business model and started to shift a bit. We've got estimates where, let's see now, a decade ago, the share of first-time buyers in the resale market was sitting at about 70%, a decade ago. It's down to 39% today, okay? And the census data that was just released, ownership rates by age, confirm this declining first-time buyer story, right? Because when you look at ownership rates by age, where did those ownership rates move down the most? It was among the millennial group aged 25 to 34. Now you can argue we've had good economic times in the last 5 years, so why should ownership rates be moving down among this group? Well, it's affordability. And it's something that I call, and it's an excuse, but I'll say it, we can't measure it. We can't measure sociological changes, right? Lifestyle changes. Why people see less stigma renting versus owning. And those kinds of things we can't measure, but we know they're there. So sociology is actually having an effect. So putting off the decision to get married, to have kids, staying in school longer, all of these things are there as well. So I think this trend towards renting rental demand will continue to grow. That's why we're seeing rental vacancy rates moving to lows that we haven't seen since the year 2000.
And maybe just to add to that too, I mean, one of the jewels in CMHC sort of repertoire of reports and studies is rental market research. It's both on the purpose-built side and the condo side. It's almost not a survey. It's almost covering the population of rental units, both condo and purpose-built. And so when I look at those numbers, A, I know they're accurate, but B, it's concerning. Like if we're thinking about people, some would-be first-time buyers who are looking at perhaps rental instead, the problem is that they can't look at it to a certain degree because we've seen the vacancy rate go below 1%. If you're thinking about condominium apartments, and one of the reasons why the condominium apartment market is so tight is that maybe some of those buyers would prefer to rent, that it makes more economic sense for them to rent, but the issue is that there's not the units there to rent. You're talking about multiple offer situations for a lot of rental condominium apartments in the Greater Toronto Area, and recent legislation that we're talking about, and the prospects of say a tax on vacant units, that only makes it worse. Because if you're thinking, well, I got some money that I'd like to invest, and I'm thinking maybe a condominium apartment might be a good investment, now you're saying, well, I'm going to be limited to the degree to which I can raise rents, whereas my costs can go up infinitely. If I have a vacancy tax, now that's an additional cost that I may just think about selling my unit, because look how much prices are going up. So it's a real issue, and especially where, Ted can correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're looking at the stock of rental, there's been more additions to the quote-unquote rental stock from the investor-held condominium apartment side over the last decade than larger scale institutional investors building bricks and mortar rental projects.
So I agree. We're running out of available rental supply. Vacancy rates have gone down, but vacancy rates have been lower. I mean, they've been as low as 0.5% in Toronto, so they could go lower. And I suspect that's where we're going to be. But to Jason's point, are there options? Maybe not, and maybe, thanks for the plug, maybe there's a need for a national housing strategy, right? Which is what the government is looking at right now. Ways to get more affordable rental into the market. I just want to say one quick thing on the OSFI thing, because I'd be very disappointed if we didn't turn this into a debate, and I will turn it into a mini debate. Okay, and sorry, as I get older, I rely on notes, so forgive me for this.
So, I got glasses.
You got glasses, I do, but I never put them on for that reason. I don't want to be accused of it. But anyhow, why did the OSFI rules come into place, okay? There's mixed messaging going on here. Some suggest that the intention was to cool the housing market. I'm not suggesting anybody here, I'm just out there, you see the headlines. I think there were lessons learned from the US credit crisis and the European debt crisis. And the lessons learned was the following. Bad things happen when you price risk, and you don't price risk properly, right? Think about all of the pain that could have been avoided had stress testing been in place in the US. Now recall, the credit crisis in the United States was triggered from what? Does anybody remember? Adjustable rate mortgages resetting, right? That was the first trigger. And people backing up, they weren't making payments or they were behind payments, some going underwater. That's the first thing that triggered that crisis. And so it's about ensuring that Canadians are not biting off more than they can chew. It's about being ready, in case a rainy day comes about, in case rates start to shoot up. It's about making the system less vulnerable and making the financial system more stable. And I think we all have a vested interest in that.
Absolutely. So I want to thank you for that. I mean, as a broker owner, and I talk to everybody in the office as often as I can, I want to bring to your attention what you're talking about when it comes to rentals and how the mindset is shifting and how that's part of being a world-class city or a world city on the stage where in big cities more people are renting, and it's not wrong to rent. You're not a loser if you don't buy. Like, we have a fabric within us that I know that my parents put into me that you have to, my father asked me when to get married at 21, just to give you an idea, right? That didn't happen. But the idea is same thing with renting, like you don't want to feel, that people don't want to feel like they're not, good or they're failures if they're renting. Which goes to the brokerage side. I've been saying for quite some time right now, I know that we get our license and we go in business and we think of selling homes. We're in the business of real estate. And where are offices located? In downtown Toronto for the most part. So just be aware that rentals may be a bigger part of your day-to-day activities and to accept it and see the opportunity and excel in it. Do not look at it as, I want to do a rental. Because the future, like our transactions, and I'll share this with both of you, in our office, our sales have not increased, but our rentals are. And they're increasing very fast. I know a downtown broker, same brand, who does 3,000 rentals a year and only 1,800 sales. Same brand. So my point is that you need to look at your business and not discount rentals, but look at it as an opportunity and see, and rents are no longer $700 a month. Now they're $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 a month. Sorry, Jake, was just going to say something?
Well, I'll just make the point too of how much more integrated the realtor and the brokerages have gotten into all aspects of the housing market. So from that pre-construction deal through to working on behalf of an investor owner renting a unit out. And so I think, you know, the involvement of the realtor in the rental space is only going to grow over the next decade. And you know, it's certainly an important part of that marketplace, especially in a marketplace where you're seeing such tight market conditions. And so a would-be renter, you know, it definitely needs help in this marketplace finding a place to live, not unlike someone that needs help finding a place to buy.
That's right. Rentals will no longer be, you know, 5% of your business day to day. It could become 25 and 30%. You know. Do you have any closing comment?
Close the loop on the OSPI thing. One last point
Sure.
is, you know, I made this I made this point about the collapse in the pricing of risk occurring in the U.S. If you think about it, in Europe, it was a very similar story. The American household was now the European government borrowing, and the American bank was the European Treasury, and the European Treasury was flooding the system with cheap loans, right? Lending money to governments at 1%, 2%. What were they thinking, right? Without doing due diligence, right? Similar kind of thing. So where was the stress testing, right? So these are the kinds of things that I think help longer term.
Thank you, Ted.
And Ted's right. I mean, there certainly is an impact to be seen based on the new stress test. And certainly from OSFI's perspective, you know, their goal is to protect and ensure the sustainability of the financial system. They don't really care if it causes people not to buy a house or whether it does. They want to make sure that people have that flexibility. And so I guess my comments are, I believe that there is flexibility within most households' balance sheet to make an adjustment of some type. But you know, 26% of people who were surveyed in our Ipsos survey said that, you know, the OSFI changes would certainly impact their decision. It didn't say that it would impact their decision in the sense that they weren't going to make a purchase, but it would certainly impact, you know, what that purchase may be and what their timing may be. So, you know, I think right now, yes, we're definitely, you know, feeling the impact of that. And I think we'll continue to throughout the year, but I think that impact's going to change from just a pure step back as people sort of figure out where they stand in the marketplace to moving back in, but perhaps in a different market segment than where we were. And some of those people will decide that, hey, I don't want to buy, I want to rent. And that only puts some more pressure on the rental market where, you know, you have the potential of less supply because of government policy.
Yeah, before we close out, I've actually witnessed it, heard stories. Somebody in family wants to move up, lived in that house for 7 years. Obviously the values went up, went to the mortgage broker to get pre-approved for a move up before making any move, and found out due to the new rules, cannot make that move. So there are going to be people that will instead renovate. And if they renovate instead or stay in the same property, they'll put further stress on the supply. And more stress on the supply creates higher prices, right? So when you see 85,000 sales possibly or 90, but yet there's 135,000 people still moving to the city, you're seeing a lot of forces from different angles, right? I want to thank them very much. Is there any question before we move on to... Oh, we have a question. Barry.
I have two. There's something you didn't touch on at all. We have more people that have turned 60 than are turning 15. 15-year-olds are declining. The 60s are appreciating. You haven't even discussed the demographic shift. That's number one. That's my first question. Can I go to the second factor?
Yes.
They always say Toronto has no money. Toronto cannot be a great city unless we have a great transit system. They always cry we have no money. So let's just bear with me for a minute. You have a property that's a 1 or 2 story building paying taxes. $100,000, $200,000, doesn't matter. Somebody comes along and builds, tears it down, and builds filing cabinets in the sky and 250 filing cabinets. All of a sudden, the city of Toronto gets development fees, they get all kinds of taxes, you'll correct me, Jason, they've got 144 new high-rise buildings around the city. All these taxes are created out of air on buildings that were never there. All of a sudden, from 2 stories, they've got 20, 30 stories. Is this a Ponzi scheme? Once we stop building, Toronto's bankrupt? Seriously, if they can't make it with this kind of development, where's the future of Toronto? So, those are my two questions.
You know what, Barry, I think it's good to see you. It's been a while since we chatted, but let me tackle your second question first, and we actually spoke to it in our release today too, because I think to a certain degree you're hitting the nail on the head. Is that, you know, especially at the local level, there is a lot of reliance on the real estate space to fill the coffers at the City of Toronto and other municipalities around the GTA, and so, you know, we are going to see the stress of softer demand for ownership housing over the next year compared to what we saw, say, in 2016 and 2017, just through the land transfer tax alone. And so you know, you're right, and you know, I'm not as much of an expert on fiscal policy as I am on the housing market, but I mean, I think that there are going to be issues there. And so when we're talking about you know, where do we get money for building, you know, large scale transit, I think there's going to be a concern this year about where do you get money to balance the books on the operating side, just bringing the regular day-to-day services to households. So you're right. I mean, when you're talking about the need for transit, and we spoke about it in our year review and outlook report, I mean, that's, you know, obviously the single greatest concern is the fact that, you know, long-term capital funding and then the ability to cover off those long-term loans on the operating side, you know, is an issue, and it becomes more of a cyclical issue when, you know, some of those operating funds are coming from a market that rides the cycles like every other segment of the economy.
You want to add anything, Ted, or?
The 60-year-old demographic you made mention of, so 20% of seniors don't move, they age in place. That's a fact. We know that from the census. 20%. Sorry, let me flip that. 80% age in place, 20% move only, right? So the majority age in place. That's one of the reasons why we have a bit of a supply problem, because a lot of the seniors are not freeing up some of those single-family homes, and we've been arguing for a while, why not just intensify along the avenues, right? There's a lot of neighborhoods that seniors live in where they'd love to stay in the community and live in a condo, but there are no condos. So why not look at that as well? And so a lot of the seniors are aging in place. Those who do move into rental. Some do move into rental accommodation as well. But what was interesting is that for the first time, I hadn't seen it in previous censuses, ownership rates for seniors, not just over 60, over 80 actually went up. And what's happening there is that seniors are moving in with kids. They're not downsizing to a retirement home or a rental as much as they you know why? They're helping their kids service that debt. There's a bit of that going on as well. So, you know, aging demographics, that's what we're seeing. In terms of the tax, quickly, the revenue stuff, I don't know if this is the argument you were making, but, you know, if we can't balance the books after having gone through this boom in real estate, and, you know, I lived downtown and I paid that land transfer tax. And I was one household, and I don't want to tell you what I paid, but if we're having a problem balancing the books with the kind of real estate activity that we've seen, and this isn't, I'm just saying, you know, because I'm into financial literacy and balancing books matters to me, then we have a problem, right? We have a problem. Because we're now moving into this phase of the cycle, right?
We're looking at property taxes going up, so we're looking at probably, right? If everybody's going to pass, everybody's going to have to share. Larry, you have a...
Yeah, just a quick question, John. Have you been given any consideration some of the issues right now politically, what's going on? Like the new, obviously the parties that are all starting on some of the platforms that you're saying now.
So what he's asking is any insight from the platforms of both, well, we don't have anything from municipal yet, but for provincial we do, I guess. Have you had any insights at all?
I mean, from the provincial perspective and the PCs, we had more certainty, you know, 4 weeks ago than we do today, and now we have 3 viable candidates, you know, running for the leadership of that party. And I think over the next week or so, we're going to, because I mean, it's a pretty short time frame in terms of choosing that leader, so we're going to have a better sense as to, you know, how those different policy plans shake out, and certainly, you know, I'm assuming that there'll be some mention, at least from some of the candidates, in terms of where they stand on policies pointed at the real estate market. I mean, that was sort of the headline policy moves over the last year from the province's perspective, and so you know, I'm sorry, Larry, but I think it's a bit of a wait and see right now because we literally are in just the infancy of this campaign now.
Yeah, thank you. Move on. Can we all thank them for being here today?